The morning sun had barely crept over the dusty main street of Cedar Ridge when Martha Sullivan began her daily walk to Henderson's general store. Each step sent a dull ache through her swollen feet, reminders of yesterday's 12-hour shift that would be repeated today, tomorrow, and every day after. At 43, Martha moved with the careful deliberation of someone who had learned that haste only brought more pain. The townspeople were already stirring. Mrs. Abigail Porter swept her porch with vigorous strokes, pausing just long enough to cast a pitying glance Martha's way before returning to her task with renewed energy. Young Timothy Banks, loading grain sacks onto his father's wagon, averted his eyes entirely. Martha had grown accustomed to being looked through rather than looked at, as if her substantial frame made her simultaneously too visible and utterly invisible. Cedar Ridge wasn't unkind. Exactly. It was simply a place where everyone had their role, and Martha's role was to work the store counter, manage the inventory, and fade into the weathered wood paneling when the day was done. Her size had long ago disqualified her from the sympathies extended to the town's spinsters and widows, where they received invitations to Sunday socials and concerned inquiries about their well-being. Martha received only silence punctuated by whispered observations about her appetite and speculation about why she'd never married. The bell above Henderson's door announced her arrival with its familiar tinny chime. Samuel Henderson glanced up from his ledger, his expression settling into its usual mask of professional tolerance. "Morning, Martha. New shipment came in last night. Needs sorting before we open." "Yes, Mr. Henderson." Martha hung her worn shawl on the back peg and tied her apron around her middle, the strings barely meeting despite the extra fabric she'd sewn in last winter. The storeroom beckoned with its towers of crates and barrels, each one requiring lifting, organizing, cataloging. Her feet, still swollen from yesterday, protested as she stood on the wooden stepladder to reach the highest shelves. By noon, the familiar burning had spread from her feet up through her calves. Martha gripped the counter for support as she served Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield, who was purchasing fabric for her daughter's wedding dress. "Such lovely silk," Eleanor mused, running her fingers along the pale blue material. "Rebecca will be radiant. It's so important for a bride to look her absolute best on her special day. Don't you think?" Martha nodded, wrapping the fabric carefully in brown paper. She'd wrapped dozens of wedding preparations over the years, lace for veils, ribbon for bouquets, fancy soaps for trousseau. Her thick fingers, surprisingly nimble despite their size, tied the package with practiced efficiency. "That'll be $4.30, Mrs. Whitfield." As Eleanor counted out her coins, she added with practiced casualness, "You know, dear doctor, Morrison mentioned he has some new tonics that might help with constitutional issues. Perhaps you should pay him a visit." The suggestion hung in the air between them like dust motes in the afternoon sun. Martha's constitutional issues, the polite term for her size, had been the subject of helpful suggestions for as long as she could remember. Tonics, exercises, special diets involving nothing but cabbage water and dry bread. She'd tried them all in her younger years, back when she still believed that becoming smaller might make her more visible in the ways that mattered. "Thank you for the thought, Mrs. Whitfield. I'll keep it in mind." Eleanor left with her package, the bell chiming her departure. Martha sank onto the stool behind the counter, surreptitiously slipping off one shoe to massage her aching foot. The relief was immediate, but temporary. There were still 6 hours until closing. 6 hours of standing, lifting, smiling, enduring. The afternoon brought its usual parade of customers, ranchers needing supplies, wives selecting provisions, children clutching pennies for candy. Martha served them all with quiet efficiency, her knowledge of the store's inventory encyclopedic after 15 years. She could find any item blindfolded, knew which brands of tobacco each man preferred, remembered every child's favorite sweet. Yet for all her competence, She remained peripheral to the life of the town. Conversations flowed around her like water around a boulder in a stream. When Jenny McCarthy burst in to share news of her engagement, she directed her excitement to the other customers, barely glancing at Martha even as she rang up her purchases. When old Robert Chen wanted advice about his rheumatism, he waited until Samuel emerged from the back office rather than ask Martha, who had helped her own mother through years of similar pain. As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting Cedar Ridge in shades of amber and rose, Martha's feet had swollen so badly that her shoes felt like iron bands. She shifted her weight from foot to foot, trying to find a position that didn't send shooting pains up her legs. The simple act of existing in her body had become a daily endurance test, one that grew harder with each passing year. The store finally emptied as supper time approached. Samuel tallied the day's receipts while Martha swept the floors, her movements slow and careful. Each bend to gather dust in the pan required calculated effort, her back protesting along with her feet. "Martha," Samuel said without looking up from his ledger, "I'll need you here early tomorrow. Big shipment from Denver coming in." "Of course, Mr. Henderson." He paused, pen hovering over the page. For a moment, Martha thought he might say something else, perhaps acknowledge the extra hours, the dedication, the fact that she hadn't missed a single day of work in 5 years. Instead, he returned to his numbers, dismissing her with silence. Martha hung up her apron and retrieved her shawl. The walk home loomed before her like a mountain to climb. She stepped out onto the wooden sidewalk, gripping the railing as she navigated the steps down to street level. The evening air carried the smell of cooking fires and family suppers, the sound of children being called home, the gentle lowing of cattle in the distant stockyards. Her small room above the millinery shop waited, with its narrow bed and single chair, its window overlooking the alley where she could watch the real life of the town unfold without being part of it. Martha began the slow journey home, each step a negotiation with pain, each breath a reminder of the weight she carried both in body and spirit. As she passed the saloon, raucous laughter spilled onto the street. Through the window, she glimpsed men gathered around tables, sharing drinks and stories, bonding over shared experiences of work and weather and women. Even Tom Bradley was there, despite having a wooden leg from a mining accident. His disability was visible, comprehensible, even noble in its way. Martha's burden was neither understood nor forgiven. She paused at the corner where Main Street met Mountain Road, leaning against a hitching post to catch her breath. In the distance, the peaks of the Rockies stood purple against the fading sky, remote and beautiful and utterly indifferent to human struggles. Sometimes Martha wondered what it would be like to simply walk toward those mountains and keep walking, to disappear into their vastness where no one knew her name or her shame. But tomorrow would bring another delivery to unpack, another day of sales to record, another 12 hours of pretending that she didn't notice the looks, the whispers, the careful distances maintained. Martha Sullivan had long ago learned that some people were meant to be part of the scenery rather than the story, fixtures as unremarkable and essential as the shelves that held the goods or the floorboards that supported the customer's weight. She resumed her journey home, her shadow long and solitary on the dusty street, in her chest, beneath the layers of flesh that marked her as different, as less than, as other, beat a heart that still remembered how to hope. It was a dangerous thing, that hope surfacing at unexpected moments, when she arranged wildflowers in empty preserve jars around the store, when she helped a young mother find just the right medicine for her sick child, when she stood at her window on Sunday mornings and listened to the church bells calling the faithful to worship. Martha Sullivan was 43 years old, and she had never been loved, never been held, never been seen as anything more than the heavy woman who worked at Henderson's. But sometimes, in the quiet moments between one breath and the next, she allowed herself to imagine that somewhere beyond the familiar boundaries of Cedar Ridge, there might exist a place where the size of one's body mattered less than the size of one's heart. For now, though, There was only the long walk home, the throbbing in her feet, and the promise of another day exactly like this one stretching endlessly into the future. The rumors started, as they often did in Cedar Ridge. At the barber shop on a Tuesday morning, Walter Hutchins was trimming Judge Coleman's gray whiskers when young Billy Turner burst through the door, eyes wide with the importance of fresh gossip. "Saw him myself," Billy declared to the assembled men. "Big as a grizzly, beard down to here." He gestured dramatically to his chest. Coming down from Eagle's Peak with a deer slung over his shoulder like it weighed nothing. "The mountain man?" asked Thomas Brennan from his waiting spot by the window. "Thought that was just talk." "No, sir," Billy insisted. "Not real as the nose on your face. Charlie Moss saw smoke from his cabin up near the tree line last month. Says he's been living up there since spring, maybe longer." Judge Coleman, ever the voice of reason despite the lather on his half-shaved face, interjected, "Could be a trapper. Nothing unusual about that." "This ain't no ordinary trapper," Walter said, razor pausing mid-stroke. "My cousin from Fort Carson says a man fitting that description served with the 7th Cavalry, deserted after some trouble at Washita River. They say he—" Walter lowered his voice conspiratorially. "Refused orders. Some say worse." The shop fell silent except for the rhythmic stropping of Walter's razor. Each man present understood the weight of such accusations. The Indian Wars had left scars across the frontier, and desertion was among the gravest of sins in a land that valued duty and civilization's advance above all else. Martha heard variations of the story throughout the day as customers filtered through Henderson's, each telling added new details, new speculation. The mountain man was a killer. He was a coward. He was mad from isolation. He was building an arsenal. He came to town at night to steal supplies. He watched the town from the ridges, planning God knows what. Mrs. Dorothy Sawyer, purchasing thread and needles, leaned across the counter to whisper, "They say he's got scars all over his face, from a bear attack, or maybe from fighting. Either way, he must be a sight to behold." "Frightful. More like," added Mrs. Catherine Mills, who had joined the conversation uninvited as was her custom. "What kind of man chooses to live alone in the wilderness? It isn't natural. Mark my words. No good will come of having such a person nearby." Martha measured out Mrs. Sawyer's thread, keeping her opinions to herself. But as the afternoon wore on and the stories grew more elaborate, she found herself oddly fascinated by this mysterious figure. While the townspeople spoke of him with fear and suspicion, Martha heard something else in their words. A man who had chosen solitude over society, who had walked away from the very structures that defined and confined the rest of them. That evening, as she swept the store's front porch, Martha gazed toward the mountains. Eagle's Peak stood sharp against the sunset, its snowcap gleaming pink and gold. Somewhere up there, if the stories were true, lived a man who had rejected everything Cedar Ridge held dear. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, it stirred something she couldn't quite name. Over the following weeks, the mountain man sightings became a regular feature of town gossip. Jake Morrison, the blacksmith's apprentice, claimed to have seen him at dawn near Crystal Creek, washing blood from his hands. The Perkins boys swore they'd found strange symbols carved into trees near the lower slopes. Indian signs, they called them, though none could say what they meant. Martha listened to each story with growing curiosity. The descriptions varied wildly. He was tall, he was giant, he had dark hair, he had gray hair, he wore furs, he wore army clothes. But one detail remained consistent. He was always alone. One quiet Thursday afternoon, when the store was empty save for the drowsing Samuel in his back office, Martha found herself sketching on a piece of brown wrapping paper. Without conscious thought, her pencil traced the outline of mountains, a small cabin among the pines, smoke rising from a chimney into a vast sky. It was a child's drawing, really, but something about it made her heart beat faster. "What's that supposed to be?" Martha startled, crumpling the paper as Samuel appeared at her shoulder. "Nothing, Mr. Henderson. Just passing time." He frowned at the wasted paper but said nothing more. Returning to his office, Martha smoothed out the drawing and tucked it into her apron pocket. That night, in her small room, she placed it on the windowsill where she could see it by moonlight. The first reliable sighting came from an unexpected source. Reverend Paul Thompson, not given to gossip or exaggeration, mentioned during his Sunday sermon that he'd encountered a stranger while visiting the sick in the mountain settlements. "A large man, yes, but gentle in manner," the Reverend reported to his flock. "He helped me when my wagon wheel broke on the mountain road, fashioned a temporary repair with nothing but rope and green wood, refused payment or even thanks, simply nodded and walked back into the forest." This description, so at odds with the fearsome tales, caused a stir among the congregation. Martha, sitting in her usual spot at the back where the pew could best accommodate her frame, felt an unexpected kinship with this stranger. She knew what it was to be transformed by gossip into something monstrous, to have one's simple existence twisted into a threat. The stories continued through autumn. The mountain man had traded pelts with the natives. He'd been seen reading a book by firelight. He'd left fresh venison on the doorstep of the widow Chen after her husband died. Each tale seemed to contradict the last, painting a portrait of a man who defied easy categorization. For Martha, the fascination grew into something deeper. During her long days at the store, she found herself wondering about the practicalities of his existence. How did he preserve meat without salt? Where did he find vegetables? Did he have books? Did he get lonely? Did the silence of the mountains feel like peace or punishment? One evening, as October painted the aspens gold and the first snow dusted the peaks, Martha stood longer than usual at the corner of Main and Mountain Road. The path that led up into the hills beckoned with unusual insistence. She could walk that way, just a little distance, not far, just enough to see where the town ended and the wilderness began. But her feet, swollen and aching as always, kept her anchored to the familiar. She turned toward home, toward her narrow bed and her small window, and another day exactly like all the others. Still, that night she dreamed of pine forests and clear mountain air, of a place where no one whispered behind their hands or suggested constitutional remedies. The next morning brought news that set the town buzzing with fresh speculation. Marcus Webb, who ran pack trains to the mining camps, had actually spoken with the mountain man. "Came right up to me at Bethany's Cross." Marcus reported to the crowd gathered at Henderson's. Needed ammunition. Paid in gold coins. Old ones. Spoke educated-like. Not rough at all. Had the strangest eyes, though. Like he was looking through me to somewhere else entirely. "Did you get his name?" someone asked. "Said to call him Josiah. Nothing more." "Josiah?" Martha turned the name over in her mind as she worked. It was biblical, meaning God heals. She wondered if he'd chosen it himself, or if it had been given to him. She wondered if he felt healed by his isolation, or if, like her, he was simply enduring. That afternoon, a rare moment of synchronicity occurred. Martha was struggling with a heavy barrel of molasses, trying to maneuver it into position behind the counter. Her back screamed in protest, her feet barely able to maintain their grip on the floor. Just as she felt her strength failing, the door chimed and heavy footsteps approached. "Let me," a deep voice said. Before she could respond, large hands took the barrel from her grasp, lifting it easily into place. Martha straightened slowly, turning to thank her helper, and found herself looking up into the face that had haunted Cedar Ridge's collective imagination for months. He wasn't as fearsome as the story suggested, though he was certainly imposing. Tall and broad, yes, with a thick beard and weather-worn features, but his eyes, gray as winter sky, held a weariness she recognized. This was not a monster or a madman. This was simply a man who had chosen to live apart, and in that choosing had become a mirror for everyone else's fears and fascinations. "Thank you," Martha managed, aware that several customers had stopped their browsing to stare. He nodded, already turning to go. At the door, He paused and looked back. "Josiah McCready," he said, as if answering a question she hadn't asked. Then he was gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of pine and wood smoke. The store erupted in whispers the moment the door closed. Martha returned to her work, but her hands trembled slightly as she arranged the items on the counter. In that brief encounter, she'd seen something in Josiah McCready's eyes that the gossips had missed entirely. A profound loneliness that echoed her own. And perhaps, just perhaps, a flicker of recognition. The November wind cut through Cedar Ridge like a blade, bringing with it the promise of early snow. Martha pulled her shawl tighter as she made her way home from Henderson's. Each step a careful negotiation with the frozen ruts in the road. The day had been particularly trying. A large shipment from Denver needed unpacking, and her feet had swollen so badly that she'd had to loosen her bootlaces completely just to keep them on. She was so focused on managing the pain that she didn't notice the figure sitting on the bench outside the millinery shop until she was nearly upon him. Josiah McCready rose as she approached, his large frame unfolding from the bench with surprising grace. "Evening, Miss Sullivan." Martha stopped, gripping her shawl. In the 2 weeks since their brief encounter at the store, she'd thought of little else but that moment of unexpected kindness. "Mr. McCready, what brings you to town so late?" "Waiting," he said simply. "Saw you through the store window earlier. You were favoring your right foot more than usual." The observation, so direct and devoid of the usual polite blindness to her struggles, left Martha momentarily speechless. When had anyone last noticed such a detail about her, let alone acknowledged it? "It's been a long day," she managed. "Might I—" He paused, seeming to wrestle with words. "I know something about pain. From the war. Learned some ways to ease it. Might I help?" Any other man making such an offer would have sent Martha fleeing. But there was something in Josiah's manner, a matter-of-fact compassion that held no ulterior motive. That made her consider. Still, propriety demanded refusal. "That's kind, but I couldn't possibly—" "There's a bench right here," he interrupted gently. Nothing improper about sitting a moment to rest. Martha glanced around. The street was largely empty, most folks inside preparing supper. The thought of even a moment's relief overcame her hesitation. She sank onto the bench with a barely suppressed groan. "May I?" Josiah gestured toward her feet. Martha nodded. Beyond caring about appearances, he knelt on the cold ground and carefully unlaced her right boot. Even that simple loosening brought relief. Then, with hands that were gentle despite their size, he began to massage her swollen foot through her worn stocking. The shock of it, being touched with such care, having her pain acknowledged and tended to, brought tears to Martha's eyes. She blinked them back, watching this mountain man who smelled of pine and leather work with the precision of someone who understood exactly where hurt lived in a body. "Learned this from a field medic," he explained quietly, his thumbs working the arch of her foot. "Said the feet carry all our burdens. Ease them, and you ease the whole person." "Mr. McCready." "Josiah." "Josiah?" The name felt strange on her tongue. "Why are you being kind to me?" His hands stilled for a moment. "Why shouldn't I be?" It was such a simple response. Yet it undid something in Martha. When was the last time someone had shown her kindness without reservation, without the underlying current of pity or disgust that usually colored people's interactions with her? The sound of approaching voices made them both tense. Josiah quickly but gently replaced her boot, loosely laced, and stood. 3 women rounded the corner: Mrs. Porter, Mrs. Whitfield, and Mrs. Mills, their evening constitutional bringing them face to face with a scene that would fuel gossip for weeks. The women stopped dead, taking in the tableau Martha on the bench, face flushed. Josiah standing protectively nearby, their expressions cycled through shock, scandal, and something approaching delight at having such prime material for tomorrow's talk. "Martha Sullivan," Mrs., Porter said, her voice dripping with false concern. "Are you quite all right?" "Yes, Mrs. Porter. Mr. McCready was just—" "We can see what Mr. McCready was doing," Mrs. Mills interjected, her eyes glittering with malicious pleasure. "Really, Martha, on a public street." Josiah stepped forward slightly, not threatening, but his presence suddenly seemed to fill the space. "Miss Sullivan was in pain. I helped. Nothing more to see than Christian charity." The women exchanged glances, clearly torn between their desire to condemn and their wariness of the mountain man. Mrs. Whitfield, ever the leader, made the decision for them. "Come along, ladies. The cold isn't good for our constitutions." They swept past, but Martha could already hear their whispers starting before they were even out of earshot. By tomorrow, the entire town would know. The heavy spinster and the wild mountain man. She could already imagine the embellishments. "I should go," Martha said, struggling to stand. Josiah offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. "They'll talk," he said. It wasn't a question. "They always do. Does it matter?" Martha considered this as they walked slowly toward the millinery shop's side entrance. Did it matter her reputation? Such as it was. Couldn't sink much lower. But there were practical considerations. Her job, her room, her survival in a town that barely tolerated her as it was. It might, she admitted. They reached her door. Josiah released her arm and stepped back, maintaining a proper distance now that they might be observed from windows. "I come to town every Wednesday for supplies," he said. "The bench is public property. Can't stop a man from sitting there come evening time." The implication hung between them. Martha knew she should refuse, should protect what little standing she had left. But the memory of those careful hands easing her pain, of being seen as a person worthy of gentleness, was too powerful. "I usually finish at the store by 6, she heard herself say. He nodded once and turned to go, then paused. "Miss Sullivan, Martha." Her name sounded different when he said it, weightier somehow. "You don't have to explain yourself to them, or to anyone." Then he was gone, disappearing into the growing darkness with the quiet confidence of a man who belonged to the mountains more than the town. Martha climbed the narrow stairs to her room, each step easier than it had been in weeks. She lit her lamp and sat on her single chair, unlacing her boots properly. Her feet still ached, but the pain had been acknowledged, tended to, honored even. She thought of Josiah's hands, scarred and weathered but infinitely gentle. She thought of how he'd stood between her and the women's judgment, not aggressively but with quiet certainty. Outside her window, Cedar Ridge settled into its evening routines. Smoke rose from chimneys. Families gathered around dinner tables. The saloon began its nightly revelry. Martha had observed this life from the margins for so many years that she'd forgotten she might be allowed to participate in it differently. She prepared her simple supper bread, cheese, an apple from the store's bruised discount basket, and ate slowly, savoring each bite. Tomorrow would bring consequences, she knew. The looks would be sharper, the whispers louder. Samuel might even say something, might threaten her position. But as she lay in her narrow bed, Martha found herself thinking not of tomorrow's trials, but of next Wednesday evening, of a bench outside the millinery shop, and a man who saw her pain without seeing it as a character flaw, of hands that knew how to heal because they had known hurt. The wind rattled her window, bringing with it the scent of coming snow. Somewhere up on Eagle's Peak, Josiah McCready would be tending his fire, alone but not lonely in his chosen solitude. Martha understood now why he'd walked away from the world's expectations. There was a freedom in that walking away, even if it came with a price. She thought of his words. You don't have to explain yourself to them. It was a foreign concept, this idea that she might exist without apology, without constantly trying to make her presence more palatable to those around her. But perhaps, she thought as sleep began to claim her, perhaps it was a lesson worth learning. In her dreams that night, Martha walked without pain through forests of pine and aspen, following a trail that led up and up toward peaks that touched the sky. And somewhere in those dreams, she wasn't walking alone. The gossip started early the next morning. By the time Martha reached Henderson's, 3 different people had found excuses to mention seeing her with that mountain man. Samuel Henderson waited until mid-morning before summoning her to his office. "Martha," he began, his discomfort evident. "There's been talk." "There's always talk, Mr. Henderson." "This is different. A man like that. It reflects on the store." Martha met his gaze steadily. "He helped me when I was in pain, nothing more." Samuel fidgeted with his ledger. "Still, it would be best if, that is, perhaps you should avoid, situations that might be misconstrued." "I'll take that under consideration," Martha said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. She returned to her work, aware of the curious glances from customers, the way conversations stopped when she approached. But something had shifted. The weight of their judgment, while still present, seemed less crushing than before. She had been touched with kindness, and that touch had left a mark that no amount of gossip could erase. Wednesday came with a light snowfall that dusted Cedar Ridge in pristine white. Martha worked through the day with an unfamiliar flutter in her chest, aware of each passing hour in a way she hadn't been in years. When 6 o'clock finally arrived, she took extra care in tidying the store, straightening her hair, and wrapping her good shawl, the wool one without patches around her shoulders. The bench was empty when she arrived, but she'd barely settled herself when Josiah emerged from the evening shadows, moving with the quiet grace of a man accustomed to walking among wild things. "Evening," he said, taking his place beside her at a respectful distance. "Evening." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching the last light fade from the sky. Then, without preamble, Josiah reached into his pack and withdrew something wrapped in soft leather. "For your feet," he said, handing it to her. Martha unwrapped it carefully, revealing a pair of moccasins unlike anything she'd seen. The leather was butter-soft, lined with rabbit fur, with thick cushioned soles that looked like they'd been shaped specifically for swollen, aching feet. "Josiah, I can't—" "You can made them myself. Learned from the Arapaho, years back. They know something about walking gently on the earth." Martha ran her fingers over the careful stitching, the thoughtful construction. When had anyone last made something specifically for her? When had anyone considered her comfort important enough to warrant such effort? "Try them," he urged gently. She glanced around, but the street was empty in the supper hour. Quickly, she unlaced her boots and slipped her feet into the moccasins. The relief was immediate, soft fur cushioning every painful point, the flexible leather accommodating her swollen flesh without binding. "Oh," she breathed, and felt tears threaten again. "Walk a bit," Josiah suggested. "Get the feel of them." Martha stood carefully and took a few steps. It was like walking on clouds after years of walking on nails. She turned back to find him watching with a satisfied expression. "How did you know the size?" A slight smile creased his weathered face. "Paid attention." They returned to the bench, Martha reluctant to remove the moccasins despite propriety. As if reading her thoughts, Josiah said, "Keep them on for the walk home. Change back before you go inside if you must." "People will see." "Let them see." It was becoming a refrain between them, this gentle challenge to her lifetime of accommodation. Martha found herself leaning into it, into this strange new possibility that her comfort might matter more than others' opinions. "Tell me about the mountains," she said, surprising herself with the request. Josiah's eyes softened. "What would you like to know?" "Everything. What it's like to wake up there, what you eat, how you fill your days, why you—" She paused, then pushed forward. "Why you chose to leave everything behind. He was quiet for a long moment, and Martha feared she'd overstepped. Then he began to speak, his voice low and measured, painting pictures with words. Morning comes different up there, not all at once like in town, but creeping through the trees like something shy. The birds start before the light jays and nuthatches mostly. Coffee tastes better when you brew it over pine. Burns cleaner. I've got a garden patch, believe it or not. Short growing season, but potatoes do well. Turnips. Some herbs. Trade with the Utes sometimes. They know plants, I'm still learning. Smoke venison for winter. Gather berries in summer. Pine nuts in fall. The creek's full of trout if you know where to look. Days are full. Always something needs doing. Wood to split, repairs to make, food to preserve. But it's honest work. No pretense in it. A tree doesn't care who you were before, just whether you respect it enough to cut it proper. He paused, seeming to weigh his next words. As for why I left, you ever feel like you were wearing clothes that didn't fit, not just tight or loose, but wrong altogether? Army life was like that for me. All those rules about who to be, how to think, who to see as enemy. They wanted me to be something I couldn't stomach being. What did they want you to be? Martha asked softly. A killer of women and children. The words came flat, matter of fact. Called it following orders. Called it civilization's progress. I called it murder and walked away. They call that desertion. I call it keeping my soul. The weight of this confession settled between them. Martha thought of the whispered speculations, the dramatic stories that had painted Josiah as everything from coward to monster. The truth, as it often was both simpler and more complex. Do you regret it? Regret leaving? No. Regret that it took me so long to see what we were doing every day. He turned to look at her fully. That's my burden to carry. We all have them. Question is whether we let them define us or refine us. Martha thought of her own burdens, the physical weight that had shaped her entire existence. Sometimes the burden is the definition. When people look at me, they don't see Martha, they see fat. Everything else gets swallowed up by that. I see you. 3 simple words, but they hit Martha like a physical blow. She turned away, unable to meet his steady gaze. I see a woman who works harder than any 3 men but gets no credit for it. Josiah continued. I see someone who's kind even when kindness hasn't been shown to her. I see strength that's got nothing to do with muscle and everything to do with spirit. And I see pain that goes deeper than sore feet. Martha felt exposed, flayed open by this accurate assessment. But underneath the vulnerability was something else, a warmth spreading through her chest like spring thaw. You don't know me, she whispered. I know enough. Know you arrange wildflowers in the store when you think no one's looking. Know you slip extra candy to the widow Chen's grandchildren. Know you saw you tucking that book away when I came in last time. Poetry, wasn't it? Byron, she admitted, astounded that he'd noticed. She walks in beauty, like the night, Josiah quoted softly, of cloudless climes and starry skies. Martha's breath caught. This mountain man, this supposed savage, quoting Byron on a snowy evening in Colorado. The incongruity of it, the unexpected beauty, made her brave. Why are you being kind to me? She'd asked before. But this time the question went deeper. Really? Why? Josiah considered, his gaze distant. First time I saw you, that day in the store, you reminded me of something. What? Myself. The way you held yourself apart but not above. The way you did your work like it mattered even though no one noticed. The way you looked at those mountains like they were calling you. He paused. And because kindness doesn't need a reason, it just needs doing. They sat quietly as the town settled into evening routines around them. Occasionally, someone passed, shooting curious glances their way. But Josiah's presence seemed to create a protective bubble that discouraged direct confrontation. I have something for you, too, Martha said suddenly, reaching into her pocket. She pulled out the folded drawing she'd made weeks ago, smoothed now from repeated handling. It's not much, just something I sketched. Josiah took it carefully, studying the simple drawing of mountains and cabin and smoke. His expression shifted, revealing a vulnerability that matched her own. You saw this? I imagined it. What freedom might look like. It looks like this, he said, refolding the paper carefully and tucking it inside his coat, over his heart. Just like this. A wind picked up, sending snow swirling around them. Martha shivered, and Josiah immediately shrugged out of his heavy coat, draping it around her shoulders over her shawl. It smelled of wood smoke and pine pitch and something indefinably him. I should go, she said, though she made no move to stand. Should you? It was a real question, not a flirtation. Martha considered, should she go back to her narrow room, her narrow life, the narrow confines of others' expectations, or should she sit here a moment longer, wrapped in unexpected warmth, feet cushioned in handmade moccasins, talking to someone who saw her as more than her flesh? Not yet, she decided, and felt Josiah's approving nod more than saw it. They talked until the stars emerged between racing clouds. He told her about the eagle family nesting near his cabin, about the way aspen leaves sounded like rain when the wind caught them right. She told him about the books she'd read, the places she'd imagined visiting, the dreams she'd compressed into acceptable shapes. When she finally stood to go, Josiah rose with her. Next Wednesday. Yes. I'll bring something else next time. What? You'll see. Martha walked home in the moccasins, Josiah's coat still around her shoulders. He'd insisted, saying he'd retrieve it next week. The softness against her feet made each step bearable, almost pleasant. When she reached her door, she turned back to see him still standing by the bench, watching to ensure she got home safely. She raised one hand in farewell. He returned the gesture, then melted back into the darkness, heading for his mountain sanctuary. Martha climbed to her room, hung his coat carefully on the back of her chair where she could see it, and placed the moccasins reverently beside her bed. The drawing was gone, carried next to a deserter's heart, in its place. She had soft leather and warm fur and the memory of being seen. It was, she thought as she prepared for bed, more than a fair trade. The delegation arrived at Henderson's General Store on a Thursday morning, their purpose as clear as the disapproval etched on their faces. Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield led the group, flanked by Mrs. Catherine Mills and Mrs. Dorothy Sawyer, with Mrs. Abigail Porter bringing up the rear like a reluctant soldier. Martha was arranging bolts of fabric when they entered, their coordinated movement immediately alerting her to trouble. She straightened slowly, hands automatically smoothing her apron. Ladies, how may I help you today? Mrs. Whitfield stepped forward, her posture rigid with righteous purpose. Martha, we've come to speak with you about a delicate matter. Perhaps we could step outside. I'm working, Mrs. Whitfield. Whatever you need to say can be said here. The women exchanged glances. Mrs. Mills cleared her throat. Very well. We've come out of Christian concern for your situation. My situation. Your association with that mountain man. Mrs. Sawyer clarified, as if Martha might have forgotten. It's become quite the topic of conversation. I imagine it has, Martha said evenly, continuing to adjust the fabric display. Mrs. Whitfield's tone sharpened. Martha, you must understand how this appears. A woman of your circumstances, carrying on with a man of his reputation. It reflects poorly on the entire town. Carrying on, Martha's hand stilled. He helped me with my sore feet, and we've had a few conversations. If that constitutes carrying on, then half this town is guilty of far worse. That's different. Mrs. Porter interjected, finally finding her voice. We're respectable married women. The implication hung in the air like smoke from a poorly tended fire. Martha felt the familiar burn of shame trying to ignite in her chest. But something new rose up to meet it. Anger, clean and clarifying. Respectable, Martha repeated slowly. Tell me, Mrs. Porter, what makes a person respectable? Is it their weight, their marital status, or perhaps it's their willingness to show kindness to another human being? Mrs. Mills gasped at this unprecedented pushback. Martha Sullivan, we're trying to help you. Are you? Martha moved from behind the counter, noting with dark satisfaction how the women stepped back slightly. Because from where I stand, you're trying to take away the one small comfort I've found in 15 years of serving this town without complaint. You don't understand. Mrs. Whitfield began. I understand perfectly. I'm allowed to exist as long as I stay in my place, as long as I don't aspire to anything beyond serving you fabric and counting your change. Heaven forbid I have a conversation with someone who sees me as more than a piece of furniture. Samuel Henderson emerged from his office, drawn by the raised voices. Ladies, is there a problem? Mrs. Whitfield turned to him gratefully. Mr. Henderson, we were just expressing our concerns about Martha's recent behavior. Surely you've noticed. I've noticed Martha continues to be my most reliable employee, Samuel said carefully, his eyes darting between the women and Martha. Beyond that, her personal time is her own. It was the closest thing to support Martha had ever heard from him, and it came as such a surprise that Mrs. Whitfield actually sputtered. Samuel Henderson, you have a responsibility to this community. I have a responsibility to run my store, he interrupted. Now, unless you ladies are here to make purchases, I'll ask you to let Martha get back to work. The delegation retreated, but not before Mrs. Whitfield delivered her parting shot. Think carefully, Martha. You may find that your friend comes at a higher price than you're willing to pay. This town has ways of dealing with those who forget their place. After they left, Martha stood trembling behind the counter. Samuel lingered awkwardly by the coffee grinder. Martha, he said finally, I don't care what you do on your own time, but they're not wrong about the talk. It could affect business. I know. He nodded and returned to his office, leaving Martha alone with her thoughts. She understood the unspoken message her job was safe for now, but that could change if the pressure mounted. The rest of the day passed in a blur of cold shoulders and pointed whispers. Customers who usually chatted now completed their transactions in silence. Children were hurried past her as if her condition might be contagious. By closing time, Martha felt like she'd been slowly crushed in a vice of social disapproval. She almost didn't go to the bench that Wednesday. The cost was becoming clear, and part of her, the part that had learned to survive by becoming invisible, urged her to retreat. But when 6 o'clock came, her feet carried her there anyway, wearing the moccasins Josiah had made. He was already there, and the sight of him, solid, real, unconcerned with the town's opinions, made her throat tight. Rough week? He asked, reading her face with that unsettling accuracy. Martha sank onto the bench. They came to warn me, the respectable women, told me I was forgetting my place. And what did you tell them? More than I should have, less than I wanted to. She laughed bitterly. I've spent so many years being grateful for scraps that I forgot I might deserve a full meal. Josiah reached into his pack and withdrew a small wooden box. Speaking of meals, he opened it to reveal carefully arranged treats. Dried berries coated in honey, nuts roasted with herbs, small cakes that smelled of cinnamon. You made these. Mountain gets lonely. Man learns to cook or starves. He offered her the box. Try the berries first. Martha bit into one, the sweetness exploding on her tongue. It tasted like summer distilled, like freedom crystallized into fruit and honey. They threatened my job, she said quietly. Not directly, but the implication was clear. Josiah's jaw tightened. Because you sat on a bench with me. Because I forgot that women like me aren't supposed to want things. We're supposed to be grateful for being tolerated. What do you want, Martha? The question, direct and sincere, caught her off guard. What did she want? She'd spent so long compressing desires into acceptable shapes that she'd almost forgotten their original forms. I want to wake up without my feet hurting, she began slowly. I want to walk down the street without feeling like I need to apologize for taking up space. I want to read poetry without hiding it. I want. She paused, gathering courage. I want to see your cabin, your garden, the eagle's nest you told me about. If her boldness surprised him, Josiah didn't show it. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully. It's a hard climb. Everything's hard. Fair point. He was quiet for a moment. Sunday. If you're willing, I'll meet you at the trailhead at dawn. Bring a mule for the steep parts. Martha's heart raced. To go up the mountain, alone with him, would cross every line the town had drawn around her. It would confirm every suspicion, justify every whisper. They'll crucify me for it. Maybe, or maybe they'll just find something else to talk about come Monday. He turned to face her fully. Martha, I can't promise you an easy path. God knows I've chosen the hardest one I could find, but I can promise you this. Up on that mountain, you're just Martha. Not the heavy woman, not the spinster, not the store clerk. Just you, breathing free air, walking on earth that doesn't judge. A group of men exited the saloon across the street, their loud laughter carrying on the cold air. One of them spotted Martha and Josiah, nudging his companions. Martha could see the story spreading already, rippling out through the town like water through a broken dam. I need to think, she said. Take all the time you need. I'll be here either way. They sat quietly, sharing the contents of his wooden box. Each bite was a small rebellion. Each moment of companionship a tiny revolution against the roles they'd been assigned. When full dark came, Josiah walked her home, maintaining a respectful distance but staying close enough that his presence deterred any confrontation. At her door, he handed her the rest of the treats. For later, when the world feels heavy, Martha climbed to her room, set the wooden box on her small table, and sat staring at Josiah's coat still hanging on her chair. The town's disapproval pressed against her windows like a physical thing, seeping through cracks in the walls. She thought of Mrs. Whitfield's threat. This town has ways of dealing with those who forget their place. It wasn't an idle warning. She'd seen what happened to those who stepped too far outside acceptable boundaries. The shunning, the lost jobs, the mysterious fires or accidents that drove the unwanted away. But she also thought of Josiah's words, just you, breathing free air. Martha picked up one of the honey-covered berries, let its sweetness dissolve on her tongue. Tomorrow would bring more warnings, more pressure. Samuel might grow less supportive as business suffered. Her room might suddenly become unavailable. Her job might disappear. Or she might wake at dawn on Sunday, put on her moccasins, and climb a mountain with a man who saw her truly. She might discover what her life could be outside the narrow confines of Cedar Ridge's expectations. The choice, for the first time in her 43 years, was entirely hers. The strangers arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. 3 men in worn military coats who tied their horses outside the saloon and made no effort to blend in. Martha noticed them through Henderson's window. The way they stood suggested purpose rather than leisure, duty rather than drift. By evening, the whole town knew why they'd come. Bounty hunters. Jake Morrison reported to the crowd gathered at Henderson's. His blacksmith's arms crossed over his chest. Asking about a deserter, got papers and everything, official looking. Martha's hands stilled on the cash register. Behind her, she heard Mrs. Mills whisper excitedly to Mrs. Sawyer about vindication and justice finally catching up. They say what unit? Samuel asked from his position by the pickle barrel. 7th Cavalry. Looking for a Sergeant Josiah McCready. Wanted for desertion and... Jake paused dramatically. Murder of a superior officer. The store erupted in conversation. Martha forced herself to continue working, mechanically counting change, wrapping purchases, her mind racing. Murder. The word hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire, acrid and choking. That evening, she didn't go to the bench. Couldn't. The weight of the accusation pressed down on her worse than any physical burden. She'd known Josiah had left the army, known there was darkness in his past, but murder. Wednesday came and went. Martha caught glimpses of the bounty hunters around town, questioning anyone who'd had contact with the mountain man. They were methodical, professional, patient. They'd set up a semi-permanent camp at the boarding house, clearly prepared for a long hunt. Thursday evening, as Martha locked up the store alone, Samuel had left early. Complaining of headache, she found Josiah waiting in the shadows of the alley. "You didn't come," he said simply. Martha glanced around nervously. "There are men looking for you. Bounty hunters. They have papers." "I know." "They say you murdered an officer." "I know that too." His voice remained steady, but Martha could see the tension in his shoulders. "Will you hear my side of it?" Part of her wanted to refuse, to retreat into the safety of not knowing, but the larger part, the part that had begun to wake these past weeks, needed to understand. "Tell me." Josiah stepped deeper into the alley, and Martha followed. In the dim light, his face looked older, carved by memories as much as weather. "Captain Theodore Brennan," he began. That was his name. Career soldier, the kind who saw glory in every charge, righteousness in every order. We were sent to a Cheyenne winter camp. Intelligence said there were hostiles there, warriors planning raids. He paused, his breath misting in the cold air. There were no warriors, just old men, women, children. Brennan knew it the moment we arrived. You could see it in his eyes, but he gave the order anyway. Said we needed to send a message. Martha's stomach clenched. She'd heard sanitized versions of such stories, tales of cavalry heroism against savage foes. This raw truth was something else entirely. I refused, told my men to stand down. Brennan pulled his pistol on me, said he'd shoot me for mutiny and carry out the order himself. Started toward the camp. Josiah's voice dropped to a whisper. "So I stopped him?" "You killed him." "I knocked him down, hit him with my rifle butt, but he fell wrong, hit his head on a rock. By the time the surgeon looked at him, he was gone." Josiah met her eyes directly. "I didn't mean to kill him, but I'm not sorry he didn't reach that camp. Those children lived because Theodore Brennan died. I can carry that weight." Martha found herself believing him. The story had the messy, unsatisfying quality of truth, not the clean narrative of hero and villain, but the muddy reality of choices made in impossible moments. "What will you do?" "Don't know yet. They're good. These hunters know their business. I could run, head further west, Canada maybe, but—" He gestured vaguely toward town, toward her. "I've got reasons to stay now." The implication warmed Martha even as it terrified her. "Josiah, you can't stay for me. I'm not worth—" "Don't!" His voice turned sharp. "Don't you dare tell me what you're worth. That's not your call to make." Before Martha could respond, footsteps echoed from the street. Josiah melted back into the shadows with practiced ease. "Sunday's still open, if you're willing. Might be our last chance." Then he was gone, leaving Martha alone in the alley with her racing heart and complicated truths. Friday brought new developments. The bounty hunters, their leader introduced himself as Lieutenant Colonel Nathan Hartley. Retired, set up a formal meeting at the town hall. Most of Cedar Ridge attended, drawn by duty or curiosity or the simple pleasure of sanctioned drama. Martha sat in the back, watching as Hartley laid out his case with military precision. The wanted posters, the testimony of survivors from Brennan's unit, the legal authority to bring McCready back dead or alive. He painted a picture of a dangerous man, a killer who'd betrayed his oath and his country. "This man has been living among you," Hartley declared, his voice carrying easily through the hall, "hiding behind false peace while the blood of a good officer stains his hands. It's your duty as citizens to help bring him to justice." Mayor Patterson stood. "What exactly are you asking of us, Colonel?" "Information, cooperation, and caution. McCready is dangerous, possibly deranged from his years of isolation. If anyone knows his habits, his hiding spots, we need to know." Martha saw heads turning, whispers starting. How long before someone mentioned the bench, the Wednesday evenings, the strange friendship between the town pariah and the mountain hermit? As if reading her thoughts, Mrs. Whitfield rose. "There is someone who might have information. Our local store clerk, Miss Sullivan, has been friendly with the man in question." Every eye in the hall turned to Martha. She felt the weight of their attention like physical pressure, crushing and inescapable. Hartley's gaze sharpened. "Miss Sullivan, would you come forward, please?" On legs that felt disconnected from her body, Martha made her way to the front of the hall. She could feel the town's eager anticipation. Finally, the fat spinster would serve a purpose, would contribute something besides embarrassment to their community. "You know Josiah McCready?" Hartley asked, his tone professional but probing. "We've spoken," Martha admitted. "When did you last see him?" Martha hesitated. Lying to a federal officer carried consequences, but so did truth. "Last week," she said finally. "He sometimes comes to town for supplies." "Has he mentioned his plans, where he stays, anyone who might be helping him?" "No." Hartley studied her with eyes that had interrogated countless witnesses. "Miss Sullivan, harboring a fugitive is a serious crime. If you know something—" "I know he helped me when I was in pain," Martha said, finding strength in simple truth. "I know he's been nothing but gentle in my presence. Beyond that, I can't help you." A murmur ran through the crowd, disappointment mixed with suspicion. Mayor Patterson intervened. "Thank you, Miss Sullivan, Colonel. We'll certainly cooperate as good citizens should. If anyone sees McCready, we'll send word immediately." Martha returned to her seat amid whispers and stares. She'd told the truth, mostly, but everyone could sense the omissions. By protecting Josiah, even minimally, she'd chosen a side, the wrong side, in Cedar Ridge's judgment. Saturday passed in a haze of isolation. Customers avoided her more obviously than ever. Samuel barely spoke, clearly weighing the liability of keeping her employed. The bounty hunters made their presence felt throughout town, questioning everyone, searching the foothills, gradually tightening their net. That night, Martha made her decision. She packed carefully her sturdiest clothes, what little money she'd saved, the wooden box of treats Josiah had given her. She wore the moccasins and carried her boots. If she was going to be driven from town anyway, she'd at least see the mountains first. Dawn came gray and uncertain. Martha slipped out of town like a guilty secret, making her way to the trailhead where Josiah waited with a patient mule and worried eyes. "You came," he said. "Perhaps I'm done being what they expect," Martha replied, accepting his help mounting the mule. "Perhaps it's time to find out what else I might be." They began to climb as the sun broke through the clouds, casting Cedar Ridge in golden light below. Martha didn't look back. Whatever waited ahead, capture, flight, or something unprecedented, it had to be better than slowly suffocating under the weight of others' judgments. The mountain path stretched before them, steep and uncertain, but for the first time in her life, Martha felt like she was moving toward something rather than merely enduring. The thin air filled her lungs with possibility, and despite everything, or perhaps because of it, she found herself smiling. The cabin appeared through the pines like something from Martha's sketch come to life. Rough-hewn logs chinked with mud, a stone chimney sending up a thread of smoke, wildflowers growing untamed around the dooryard. But there was no time to admire it. Josiah's tension had been growing with each mile they climbed. his eyes constantly scanning their back trail. "Inside," he said, helping Martha down from the mule. "They're closer than I'd like." Martha's legs trembled from the ride, muscles unused to such work protesting every movement. But she followed Josiah into the cabin, struck immediately by its sparse efficiency. A narrow bed, a table and 2 chairs he must have built in hope of company, shelves lined with preserved food, and a surprising number of books. "You read Byron," she said, momentarily forgetting their danger. "Among others." "But Martha," he moved to the window, peering down the mountain. "They'll have tracked us, these hunters. They know their business. We need to decide what comes next." Martha sank onto one of the chairs, reality crashing back. "Josiah, I can't. I'm not built for running. I can barely walk on flat ground without pain." "Not asking you to run." He turned from the window, and she saw the weight he carried written in every line of his face. "I'm asking you to choose. They'll question you when they come. Might arrest you for aiding a fugitive. Your life in town, such as it was, is over either way." Martha knew he was right. The moment she'd ridden out of Cedar Ridge with him, she'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "What are our options?" "I could turn myself in, take my chances with military justice." His smile was bitter. "Not much chance there, though. Brennan had friends, influence. They'll hang me sure as sunrise." "No." The word came fierce and immediate. "What else?" "We could make for the higher passes. I know trails they don't. Could maybe lose them in the peaks. But it's hard going. And winter's coming. You'd suffer." "I'm suffering now," Martha pointed out. "At least in the mountains it would be for a reason." Josiah crossed to her, knelt so they were eye level. "There's a third way. I've got friends among the Ute. They'd shelter us, but it means leaving everything behind. Living among them, their ways. Some would call it going native, becoming something white society won't forgive." Martha thought of white society, of Mrs. Whitfield's pinched face and conditional charity, of years spent apologizing for her existence, making herself smaller in spirit, if not in body. Would your friends accept me as I am? The Ute judge a person by their actions, their heart. Size means strength to them, not shame. But Martha, it's a hard life. Different. No going back. Through the window, Martha caught a glimpse of movement in the trees below. The hunters, methodical and relentless. Time was running out for choices, for chances. "There's something else," Josiah said quietly. "Something I should have said weeks ago. He stopped, started again. "I care for you, Martha. Not from pity, not from loneliness, but because you're the first real thing I've found since I walked away from that massacre. Your strength, your kindness despite everything. The way you see beauty, even in your cage. I could face whatever comes if you're with me." Martha's eyes filled with tears. In 43 years, no one had ever spoken such words to her. She dreamed them, imagined them, but never believed they could be real. "I'm old," she whispered. "I'm fat. I'm everything a man like you shouldn't want." "You're everything I do want," Josiah said simply. "The question is what you want." A shout echoed up from below. The hunters had found the mule's tracks. Martha stood, decision crystallizing. "I want to live, not exist, not endure, but live. If your friends will have us." Josiah rose, pulled her into an embrace that made her feel, for the first time in her life, not small but protected. "Then we go. Now. Take only what matters." They moved quickly, Josiah filling a pack with essentials while Martha grabbed the few things that mattered. Her mother's ring, the book of poetry, the wooden box of treats. Outside, voices grew closer, military precision closing in. "This way." Josiah led her out the back, into a landscape that seemed all vertical stone and treacherous drops. "There's a path. Trust me." Martha had no choice but to trust. Her moccasined feet found purchase on rocks that would have defeated her boots. When the path narrowed to a ledge barely wider than her body, Josiah stayed close, steady hand guiding her. Behind them, shouts of discovery. The hunters had reached the cabin. "Here!" Josiah pulled her into a cleft in the rock, a hiding spot invisible from below. They pressed together in the narrow space, breathing hard, listening as boots thundered past on the trail above. "McCready!" Hartley's voice boomed across the mountainside. "We know you're here. The woman, too. Come out now, and I guarantee she won't be charged. Make us hunt you, and I make no promises." Josiah's arms tightened around Martha. She could feel his heartbeat, rapid but steady. "Don't listen," he whispered. "He's lying." They waited, cramped and anxious, as the hunters spread out, searching. Martha's legs began to cramp, her body protesting the confined space, but she held still, drawing strength from Josiah's presence. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky, shadows shifting. Finally, as dusk approached, the voices faded. Either the hunters had moved on or were setting a trap. "We go now," Josiah decided. "Dark will help." They emerged from their hiding place, Martha's muscles screaming, but there was no time for pain. Josiah led her along paths that seemed more memory than reality, navigating by instinct in the gathering dark. They climbed higher, into air so thin Martha had to stop frequently to catch her breath. Her body, already pushed beyond its limits, began to rebel. She stumbled, caught herself, stumbled again. "I can't," she gasped, hating the weakness but unable to deny it. "You can." Josiah wouldn't let her stop. "See that ridge just to there? The Ute camp is just beyond." Martha looked up at the ridge, impossibly far above. Everything hurt, her feet despite the moccasins, her legs, her lungs, her heart. This was madness, thinking someone like her could make such a journey. Then she heard it, dogs barking below, the hunters' voices returning. They'd brought trackers. "Martha," Josiah's voice was urgent but gentle. "I know it's hard. I know it hurts, but you're stronger than you think. You've been climbing mountains your whole life, just different ones. Don't stop now." Something in his words, his faith in her, sparked defiance. Martha had endured 43 years of Cedar Ridge. She could endure this too. Step by step, breath by breath, she climbed. The dogs grew closer. Once, Martha glimpsed their pursuers through the trees. 5 men now, armed and determined. But Josiah knew his mountain, knew secret ways and hidden passages. He led her through a stream to break their scent, across a scree field that would show no tracks. Just when Martha thought she couldn't take another step, they crested the ridge. Below, sheltered in a valley, firelight revealed a collection of teepees. The Ute camp. "Almost there," Josiah encouraged. "They know we're coming. I sent word weeks ago, just in case." "Weeks ago. When I realized what you meant to me, I wanted options." They half climbed, half slid down into the valley. Dogs ran out to meet them, but these were friendly, tails wagging. People emerged from teepees, men, women, children, all watching with curious but not hostile eyes. An elderly man stepped forward, speaking to Josiah in a language Martha didn't understand, but she recognized the tone: welcome, concern, urgency. "This is Chief Ouray," Josiah explained. "He says the hunters are known to them, says they won't dare follow here. We're safe, for now." Safe. The word seemed foreign after the terror of the chase. Martha's legs finally gave out, and she sank to the ground, past caring about dignity. A woman approached, round-faced and smiling, offering a water skin. Martha drank gratefully, tasting herbs and coolness. More conversation in that fluid language. Then Josiah knelt beside her. "They're offering us shelter. a place with them if we follow their ways, contribute to the tribe. But Martha, I need to know, is this what you want? It's still not too late. You could go back, say I forced you. No. Martha found strength for certainty. I chose this. I choose this. I choose you. Relief transformed his face. He translated for Chief Ore, who nodded approvingly and gestured to the woman who'd brought water. She helped Martha to her feet, chattering in broken English about rest and food and healing herbs for pain. As Martha was led to a teepee, she looked back at the ridge they'd crossed. Somewhere beyond it, the hunters would be regrouping. Cedar Ridge would be spinning stories. Martha Sullivan, the fat spinster, had run off with the mountain man. Scandal, shame, disgrace. But here, in this firelit valley, she was just a woman who'd chosen love over safety, freedom over the familiar cage. Tomorrow would bring challenges, new language, new customs, new ways of being. But tonight, she would rest in a place where her size meant strength and her choice meant courage. The flap of the teepee closed behind her, shutting out the past. Outside, she could hear Josiah's voice mixing with others, making plans, building futures. Martha smiled in the darkness. Let Cedar Ridge have its gossip. She had found her mountain, and against all odds, she had climbed it. Spring came late to the mountains that year, but when it arrived, it transformed the valley into a paradise of wildflowers and rushing streams. Martha sat outside the teepee she shared with Josiah, working deerskin with practiced movements that would have astounded her former self. Her hands, once soft from store work, now showed the strength that came from real labor. 6 months had passed since their flight from Cedar Ridge. 6 months of learning, adapting, becoming. The Ute had welcomed them with a generosity that still sometimes moved Martha to tears. Here, her size was seen as healthy, promising. The women had taught her their crafts, their language, their ways of being in the world. The children called her Aunt Mountain, a name that made her laugh instead of cringe. You're getting good at that, Josiah observed, settling beside her with his own work arrows he was fletching for the upcoming hunt. Na Shachi says I have natural hands for it, Martha replied, using her teacher's name with careful pronunciation. Though I think she's just being kind. The Ute don't waste kindness on lies. Josiah reminded her, if she says you're good, you're good. Martha smiled, continuing her work. It still surprised her sometimes. This life they'd built, not easy. There had been hard days, cold nights, moments when her body protested the new demands placed upon it, but purposeful in a way her old life had never been. A commotion at the valley's entrance drew their attention. Riders approaching. Not Ute. Martha's hands stilled, old fears surfacing, but Josiah remained calm, watching as Chief Ore went to meet the visitors. Traders, he identified. From Fort Carson. They come every spring. Among the trading party, Martha recognized a face. Thomas Brennan from Cedar Ridge, the rancher who'd always been cordial at the store. Their eyes met across the distance, his widening in shock. Martha waited for the familiar shame to rise, but felt only mild curiosity about what stories he'd carry back. The traders conducted their business and left, but not before Brennan approached their teepee. Josiah tensed, but Martha placed a calming hand on his arm. Miss Sullivan Brennan removed his hat, clearly struggling with what to say. We thought, that is, everyone assumed. That I was dead, Martha suggested calmly. Murdered by the savage deserter. Brennan had the grace to flush. Something like that, though there were rumors. The bounty hunters said. What did they say? Josiah asked, his voice carefully neutral. They searched for weeks, found your cabin, your trail, but lost it in the high passes. Colonel Hartley was furious, swore you must have had help from the Indians. Brennan paused. They've moved on. Word is the army called them off, said you weren't worth the resources anymore. Martha felt Josiah relax beside her. Not complete safety, but better than active pursuit. Brennan shifted uncomfortably. The town. Well, there was quite an uproar. Mrs. Whitfield took to her bed for a week. Mr. Henderson had to hire 2 people to replace you, neither lasting more than a month. And now, Martha asked, what does Cedar Ridge think now? Opinions vary. Some say good riddance. Others, he met her eyes. Others say maybe you found something the rest of us are too scared to look for. After he left, Martha and Josiah sat in silence, processing this unexpected connection to their old world. Do you miss it? Josiah asked finally. The town, the store, that life. Martha considered. I miss some things. Books, mostly. Real coffee. But miss the life itself, no. I was dying there, just too numb to realize it. That evening, the tribe gathered for a celebration. The spring buffalo hunt had been successful, ensuring prosperity for months to come. Martha had contributed by helping to prepare the feast, her knowledge of preserving and seasoning proving valuable in unexpected ways. As night fell and drums began their rhythm, Chief Ure called Martha and Josiah forward. He spoke in Ute, with Josiah translating, about courage and choice, about people who chose family over blood, tribe over birthright. Then, in a ceremony that Martha only partially understood but felt in her bones, they were formally adopted into the tribe. You are Ute now, Chief Ure said in careful English. Not visitors, family. Martha wept openly, not caring who saw. Josiah held her, his own eyes suspiciously bright. Around them, the tribe celebrated their new members with songs and dances that went late into the night. Later, in their teepee, Martha lay beside Josiah on buffalo robes that had replaced her narrow town bed. Did you imagine this? She asked. When you first spoke to me that day in town. No, he admitted. I imagined, I don't know, maybe sharing my cabin, teaching you the mountains. But this, he gestured to encompass their new life. This is better than anything I imagined. Even though I am still fat, the old insecurity surfaced occasionally, harder to shed than her town clothes. Josiah rolled to face her. You're strong, you're capable, you're beautiful. The rest is just noise from people who never learned to see. Martha kissed him then, still marveling that she could, that this man who'd seen her true worth had chosen her as surely as she'd chosen him. Morning brought unexpected visitors. A Ute hunting party had encountered travelers, a family heading west, their wagon broken, their youngest child sick. Without hesitation, the tribe offered aid. Martha found herself tending the sick child alongside the tribe's healer, using knowledge gained from years of recommending remedies at Henderson's. The mother, a worn woman named Sarah Fletcher, watched with desperate hope as Martha and the healer worked. They said in town there was a white woman living with the Indians, she said. Said she was touched in the head, but you seem sane. Martha smiled. Sanity's relative. Mrs. Fletcher, I chose love over loneliness, freedom over the familiar. Some would call that mad. The child recovered, and the family stayed 3 days while repairs were made to their wagon. During that time, Sarah sought Martha out repeatedly, hungry for something she couldn't quite name. On their last evening, Sarah confessed, I envy you, the courage to just leave, to choose different. It wasn't courage, Martha said honestly. It was desperation. I just got lucky in where it led me. After the Fletchers departed, continuing their journey to California dreams, Martha reflected on the strange turns life could take. A year ago, she'd been invisible in a town that saw only her flesh. Now, she was seen, known, valued, not despite her body but inclusive of it. The season turned, summer bringing its own challenges and rewards. Martha learned to ride, her initial terror giving way to competence, then actual enjoyment. She learned to gather plants, to read weather signs, to contribute in ways that went beyond mere labor. Her feet, in moccasins crafted specifically for her needs, rarely pained her now. The mountain life that had seemed impossibly hard had strengthened her in unexpected ways. One autumn evening, as golden aspens shivered in the breeze, a lone rider approached the camp. Martha recognized him immediately. Reverend Thompson from Cedar Ridge, the one person who'd spoken kindly of Josiah from the beginning. He dismounted wearily, older than Martha remembered. "Miss Sullivan, Mr. McCready, I've come with news." They welcomed him, offered food and rest. When he was settled, he shared his purpose. "Colonel Hartley is dead, killed in an ambush in Kansas, chasing another fugitive. But before he died, he sent a letter to Fort Carson, said he'd been wrong about Washita River, found witnesses who confirmed your account. Josiah, Captain Brennan had indeed ordered the massacre of innocents. Your name's been cleared, at least unofficially. The army won't pursue you further." Josiah received this news in silence, but Martha saw the weight lift from his shoulders. Not forgiveness, he'd never sought that, but vindication of a sort. "And the town?" Martha asked. "How does Cedar Ridge fare?" "Changed," Thompson said simply. "Your leaving created ripples. Some women started questioning the rules they lived by. Mrs. Henderson left Samuel caused quite a scandal. Young Jenny McCarthy married that Chinese boy from the laundry, despite all protests. It's as if your breaking free gave others permission to consider their own cages." That night, the Reverend conducted an impromptu service, blessing their union in terms both Christian and inclusive of their new beliefs. It wasn't legal by territorial standards, but in their hearts and in the eyes of their tribe, Martha and Josiah were fully wed. As winter approached once more, Martha stood at the valley's edge, watching snow dust the peaks. Josiah joined her, wrapping a buffalo robe around them both. "Any regrets?" he asked, as he did sometimes. "Only one," Martha said. "That it took me 43 years to learn that the size of a life isn't measured by the body that lives it." Below them, the camp prepared for winter, smoking meat, repairing tippies, children playing in the last warm light. Martha's life, once so small and confined, had expanded beyond anything she could have imagined. She'd traded the cage of others' expectations for the freedom of mountain sky, judgment for acceptance, mere existence for true living. The wooden box Josiah had given her sat in their teepee, now filled with new treasures, beadwork from her teachers, a child's drawing calling her Aunt Mountain, pressed flowers from her first successful plant-gathering expedition, small tokens of a large life, proof that transformation was possible at any age, any size, for anyone brave enough to climb their own mountain. As stars emerged in the darkening sky, Martha Sullivan McCready, former store clerk, former spinster, former prisoner of others' opinions, stood free on her mountain, loved and loving, exactly as she was meant to be. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope Martha and Josiah's journey touched your heart as it did mine. Where are you listening from today? Please share in the comments below. I love connecting with listeners from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about this story. Did Martha's transformation inspire you? What did you think of her choice to leave everything behind for love and freedom? Let me know in the comments.